there is something very few people ever pause to consider. What truly passes through a man's mind in those quiet moments immediately after sex? It is not what you think, and it is certainly not what most women imagine. The reality, revealed again and again through years of clinical experience, is so striking that once you hear it, your perspective on men will never be the same. Stay with me, because what I will explain today is not obvious, yet it carries the power to change how you understand intimacy forever. After 3 decades of listening to countless men behind closed doors, I can tell you with certainty, almost no one speaks about what actually happens in those minutes after passion. And yet, this truth is essential because it exposes the gap between what women believe and what is really unfolding in the male psyche. Here is the first misunderstanding. Many women hold on to the comforting thought that after intimacy, men are lying there wondering about them, about love, about commitment. It is an illusion we project onto them, not their authentic inner reality. Their mind functions on a different rhythm. The sooner we accept that, the sooner we can meet relationships with clearer eyes. What takes place biologically is this. Right after climax, a man's body produces a flood of prolactin, spiking up to 5 times its usual level. This hormone generates a sense of relief, heaviness, and drowsy satisfaction, very much like the urge to rest after a large meal. That is why so many men suddenly appear distant, sleepy, or withdrawn. It is not rejection, and it is not lack of affection. It is the body's chemistry. Yet beneath that surface calm, the mind begins to stir in more complex ways. Because while the body rests, the subconscious is busy processing and assessing far more than you might think. Before we go further, make sure to subscribe to my channel SYC Soul. Tap the notification bell and like this video so you never miss what is coming next. Share it with someone who might need to hear this truth. And now, let us continue, because the thoughts men never voice in that moment may hold the key to understanding what they truly feel. As the body enters relaxation, another layer quietly emerges. This is where psychology reveals something crucial. Men do not linger in sentimental reflection the way women often imagine. Instead, their subconscious begins to measure, to test, and to evaluate. What exactly is being evaluated? It is not always obvious, but it becomes clear when you listen carefully to what men themselves reveal. Throughout my years of clinical practice, I have heard this same confession repeated. After sex, men are far less focused on love stories or emotional dreams, and far more influenced by a set of instinctive patterns deeply rooted in biology. This does not mean they feel nothing. Rather, it means their priorities at that moment differ sharply from the ones women expect. Carl Jung, the great psychologist, often explained that the unconscious governs much of human behavior. What unfolds after intimacy is one of the clearest examples of this. A man may look calm, even distant, but in truth, his mind is busy comparing present experience with countless impressions stored in memory. The woman by his side is no longer just a partner. She becomes the subject of an instinctive, silent examination. This may sound cold, yet it is not without meaning. It is here that men begin to sense whether they feel closeness, satisfaction, or even distance. For many women, this is a mystery. They believe if he turns away or falls asleep, he is ignoring them. But in reality, he is passing through a natural sequence of reactions guided more by hormones and the unconscious than by deliberate choice. And there is more. Just as the body rests, the nervous system enters a different state, one designed to restore balance. This is not rejection, but recovery. Still, while the body seeks balance, the psyche continues its hidden work. In that quiet hour, subtle judgments are being formed, judgments that may later shape the course of the relationship itself. So, what does this tell us? That we should not rush to interpret silence as lack of care. Instead, we must understand that men process differently, through a rhythm that is not immediately visible. Stay with me here, because what I reveal next we'll go even deeper into how men truly respond once intimacy fades into quiet. The next truth may surprise you even more than the first. When we examine this state more carefully, one striking reality appears. Many women confuse a man's physical withdrawal with emotional disconnection. They interpret the closing of his eyes or his silence as rejection, when in fact it is nothing more than the body entering its natural phase of recovery. Psychology reminds us that what seems cold on the surface may actually be a vital mechanism of the male system. The surge of prolactin not only brings drowsiness, it also activates a kind of boundary. This boundary allows men to temporarily detach from the intensity of passion, almost as though the mind requires space to reset. For women, who often long for closeness after intimacy, this can feel deeply unsettling. Yet it is essential to recognize this distance is not a verdict on a relationship. It is simply how his biology works. Carl Jung emphasized that projection often distorts our understanding of others. Women, in this context, project their own needs onto men, assuming he must be longing for conversation, affection, or deep reflection. But what is true for one psyche does not necessarily apply to another. The masculine psyche follows its own hidden patterns we must learn to respect rather than misinterpret. Consider the countless couples who fall into unnecessary conflict because of this misunderstanding. A woman seeks connection while the man, overcome by hormonal release, drifts toward silence. She feels neglected. He feels pressured. Yet neither realizes they are both reacting according to their natural design. This cycle, repeated again and again, creates distance not because love is absent, but because awareness is missing. The deeper truth is that a man's stillness is not emptiness. Behind that calm face, impressions are forming subtle evaluations about the experience, about the bond, about the person beside him. Though he may not put these thoughts into words, they quietly shape his attitude in the days to follow. It is in these silent evaluations that we begin to see how biology and psychology intertwine. The body rests, the mind judges, and the unconscious writes conclusions that may guide his future choices. This is why understanding the psychology of that moment is so powerful. Without it, one risks building resentment on false assumptions. With it, one can recognize the rhythm for what it truly is, a natural sequence every man passes through. Stay attentive, because in the next part, we will uncover how these unconscious evaluations influence not just the present moment, but the future of relationships themselves. As we move deeper into this subject, one fact becomes clearer. The minutes after intimacy often carry more weight than the act itself. This is the point where men, without speaking, begin to shape judgments that can influence their long-term attachment. While a woman may be seeking reassurance through closeness, the man's psyche is already busy drawing conclusions in silence. Carl Jung taught that our unconscious processes guide us far more than our conscious mind. Here, that teaching proves true. A man does not sit and deliberately analyze his partner in those moments. Yet instinctively, his inner self is forming impressions about attraction, about comfort, about trust. These subtle impressions, born in silence, may later surface as feelings of devotion, indifference, or even avoidance. For women, this can feel deeply puzzling. They ask themselves, why does he seem distant when I long to connect? The answer lies not in a lack of care, but in how differently men and women process intimacy. Women often wish to extend emotional closeness immediately afterward, while men, guided by their biology, shift into a phase of withdrawal and quiet assessment. The conflict arises not because one is wrong, but because the rhythms do not align. When unrecognized, this mismatch can lead to misunderstandings. A woman may feel unwanted. A man may feel unfairly judged. Both carry assumptions and both suffer because they are unaware of the psychological truth shaping these reactions. Yet when we begin to see this pattern for what it really is, a new kind of understanding becomes possible. And here is where I want to pause and ask you directly. Do these truths resonate with you? Can you see yourself or your relationships reflected in these patterns? If so, let me know in the comments where in the world you are watching this video from. Your response not only connects us, but also shows me whether these insights are reaching you. And if you value this work, I truly appreciate your support as we continue this journey together. Because what comes next is even more revealing. We will now look at how these unspoken judgments, formed in silence, later influence men's choices and behaviors, often without them even realizing it. What truly surprises many people is how these quiet, unconscious judgments reach far beyond the bedroom. A man may not speak them aloud, he may not even be fully aware of them, yet they influence how he behaves, how he communicates, and whether he feels drawn closer or pulled further away. These evaluations become like hidden notes written into the script of the relationship. Carl Jung often reminded us that the unconscious is not passive, it is active, shaping decisions without our permission. This is exactly what we see here. After intimacy, while the body is in recovery, the unconscious writes its silent conclusions. Perhaps he feels ease and warmth. Perhaps he feels doubt. He may not explain these feelings, but they will guide his actions in subtle, powerful ways. This is why so many women feel confused when a man shifts his behavior. They ask, why does he seem close one day and distant the next? The truth is often rooted in those quiet minutes after sex. While she may still be focused on emotional closeness, his psyche has already recorded impressions that influence his next move. Understanding this changes everything. Instead of mistaking his withdrawal as rejection, we can see it as part of a natural rhythm. Instead of believing his silence means indifference, we realize it is the stage where his inner self is making sense of the experience. This awareness does not erase the differences between men and women, but it gives us the power to interpret those differences with wisdom rather than resentment. And here is a truth that cannot be ignored. If we fail to understand this, we risk allowing projection to ruin connection. When women impose their own expectations on men, they misread his silence, and the relationship suffers. But when we see silence as evaluation rather than absence, suddenly the dynamic makes sense. Before we continue, I want to remind you, if these insights are opening your eyes, make sure you subscribe to my channel SYC Soul, hit the notification bell, and like this video so you never miss the upcoming parts. And do share this with someone who needs this clarity in their life. Stay with me, because in the next section, we will uncover how this hidden evaluation process becomes a turning point shaping whether men build lasting bonds or retreat from them. When we trace this process further, we see how powerful these silent evaluations truly are. In the quiet aftermath of sex, men are not consciously deciding the future of their relationship. Yet their unconscious impressions often become the seeds from which future choices grow. What feels like a moment of stillness is, in truth, a moment of silent judgment. Carl Jung highlighted that archetypes and instincts shape human behavior beyond our awareness. Here, that principle becomes visible. A man may lie in silence, his body at rest, but his psyche is already mapping patterns, whether he feels safe, whether he feels satisfied, whether he senses alignment or distance with the person beside him. These impressions may not be spoken, yet they carry lasting weight. This explains why so many relationships shift in tone after intimacy. Women sometimes assume closeness should automatically lead to deeper attachment. When this does not occur, they feel betrayed or misled. But the reality is more complex. For men, attachment is not dictated only by the act itself, but by the unconscious conclusions formed afterward. Think of it as a hidden filter. Every experience passes through this filter, and what emerges shapes how he acts next. If his impressions are positive, he may lean in, feeling more connected and open. If they are uncertain, he may withdraw, appearing distant without fully knowing why. The key is that this process is not deliberate, it is instinctive. The tragedy arises when women misinterpret this instinct. They may accuse him of being uncaring or unfaithful, while he himself struggles to explain feelings he cannot consciously name. Conflict grows, not because either person is insincere, but because they are unaware of the unseen forces shaping their connection. By recognizing this hidden truth, we begin to see relationships with clearer eyes. We realize that silence after intimacy is not emptiness, but a stage of processing. It is here, in this silence, that men unconsciously decide whether to deepen their bond or to distance themselves. Stay close, because in the next part, we will uncover how these unconscious choices influence not only emotions, but also the patterns of behavior that define the relationship over time. If we observe carefully, it becomes clear that the period after intimacy functions almost like a hidden mirror. In that mirror, men see reflections of their own instincts and impressions, though they may not consciously recognize them. This mirror does not show them what women hope to see, but rather what their unconscious records in silence. Carl Jung often spoke of the shadow, the unseen part of the psyche that quietly influences our choices. After sex, this shadow is active. The man may not say anything, but he is silently confronting his own impressions. Does he feel fulfilled? Does he feel trust? Or does he feel distance? These impressions, though unspoken, shape his behavior in the days that follow. For women, this creates a challenge. They long for words, for gestures of closeness, yet men often withdraw into quietness. What appears to be indifference is instead the psyche processing silently. Without understanding this, a woman may wrongly believe she has been dismissed, when in reality, he is simply moving through his natural rhythm. These rhythms are not temporary. They repeat. Each time, the male psyche follows the same cycle: release, withdrawal, evaluation. Over time, these cycles add up to a pattern that defines his emotional stance in the relationship. This is why a man can seem consistent in his actions, even when he cannot fully explain his reasons. His unconscious is writing the story for him. The danger lies in misreading the story. Many conflicts begin in these moments. A woman assumes his silence means rejection. He, unable to describe the workings of his own psyche, grows defensive or detached. Both suffer because they do not recognize the hidden structure guiding the experience. To see this clearly is to step into greater awareness. We can begin to interpret his stillness, not as a lack of care, but as part of a process. In that process, impressions are being formed that quietly decide whether the bond will strengthen or weaken. Stay attentive, because in the next part, we will explore how these repeating cycles build momentum and why understanding them can mean the difference between harmony and distance in a relationship. Over time, these post-intimacy cycles reveal themselves as one of the strongest influences on how men connect or disconnect. Each quiet evaluation, each unspoken judgment, builds on the last, creating a hidden chain of impressions that directs his feelings. He may never openly speak about them, yet they gradually determine the path of the relationship. Carl Jung insisted that much of human behavior is decided long before consciousness takes notice. Here, this truth becomes undeniable. What seems like a simple moment of rest is, in reality, the unconscious shaping the man's outlook. With every experience, his inner world either reinforces closeness or places distance, and his actions follow accordingly. For women, this process is often invisible. They look for signals in his words, in his gestures, in what he chooses to say after intimacy. But the real decision has already been made silently, guided by instincts and hormones that words cannot fully explain. This is why many women feel confused, asking themselves why behavior shifts without warning. The truth is, the warning signs were always there, just not in the form they expected. His silence, his sudden sleepiness, his absence of dialogue, all of these are signs of his natural rhythm. They are not personal attacks, nor proof of lack of care. They are simply reflections of how his system restores itself and how his unconscious carries out its hidden work. Recognizing this frees us from unnecessary conflict. Instead of demanding words that may not exist, we learn to interpret the silence as part of his psychology. In that silence, judgments are being made, not cold judgments of rejection, but instinctive assessments of the bond. These assessments may guide his loyalty, his openness, or his hesitation. This awareness allows relationships to shift from confusion to clarity. It shows us that what happens after intimacy is not emptiness but activity of a different kind, activity that happens below the surface, in the realm of the unconscious. Stay with me now, because in the next part, we will see how these hidden impressions eventually manifest in visible patterns of behavior, patterns that can strengthen or weaken a relationship without either partner fully realizing why. By now it is clear that what happens in the aftermath of intimacy is not a pause, but a turning point. Each time, a man's unconscious draws conclusions that ripple into his behavior. He may not realize it, he may not admit it, yet these quiet impressions often decide whether he draws nearer in devotion or slowly withdraws into distance. Carl Jung emphasized that the unconscious never sleeps. It continues shaping reality, even when the conscious mind believes nothing is happening. This principle explains why men, after sex, appear calm on the outside, but are actually forming the foundations of how they will act tomorrow, next week, and beyond. For women, the challenge is in recognizing that what feels like absence is actually presence of a different kind. His silence is not blankness, it is filled with unconscious work. His stillness is not lack of care, it is the processing of impressions that may later emerge as decisions, attitudes, or emotional responses. This is why relationships sometimes feel unpredictable. A woman may sense sudden distance and wonder what changed, but in truth, nothing changed in that moment. It was decided silently in the hours after intimacy, when his unconscious recorded impressions. Each cycle adds another layer, until patterns emerge that even he cannot explain. To misinterpret this silence is to create unnecessary pain. To recognize it is to step into deeper understanding. Once we see that men's unconscious patterns differ from women's conscious expectations, we begin to remove projection and replace it with clarity. And it is this clarity that transforms connection. No longer do we demand what the other cannot naturally provide. Instead, we allow space for the rhythms of both psyches, hers longing for closeness, his needing silence to process. Where once there was conflict, now there can be acceptance. But this journey is not yet complete, because in the final part, we will uncover how understanding these truths can change not only how we see men, but how we navigate love itself with greater wisdom, patience, and freedom from illusion. One truth remains above all others. A woman's worth is never determined by intimacy with a man. It is defined by the relationship she holds with herself. The stronger she is rooted in her own inner stability, the more she radiates an attraction that lasts, not shallow or fleeting, but profound, commanding both respect and admiration. Men sense this instinctively. They can feel whether a woman's actions come from emptiness or from strength. And only the energy of strength awakens their lasting devotion. So remember this. Stay the same woman you were before, intimacy independent, interesting, valuable. Sex is not a measure of your worth. It is only one more way of expressing your fullness. Many encounters are forgotten, but the women who remain unforgettable are the ones who show men that true love is not built on dependence, but on freedom. And this freedom, joined with authenticity and consistency, becomes the secret force that imprints her forever in both his heart and his mind. If this message resonated with you, then make sure to subscribe right now and turn on the bell icon so you never miss the next powerful insight. And don't just keep this to yourself, share this video with friends who need to hear it too. Together, let's spread awareness, strength, and the kind of wisdom that changes lives.